They said every man had a price, but not Clay Harlow. For 20 years, he bled for that stretch of red dirt and dying grass they called the Silver Mesa. When the Millionaire's men came with papers and promises, he just spat dust and turned away. But that was before she rode in his daughter. Her eyes carried city fire and something else, something that made the wind go still. That day, the ranch stopped being just land. It became a battlefield for pride, love, and the ghosts of what a man can't let go. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a ride into the Old West. The sun was a merciless overseer that day, glaring down on the Silver Mesa until the air itself shimmered like a mirage. Clay Harlow stood by the split-rail fence, one hand resting on the worn wood, the other shading his eyes as he watched a speck on the horizon grow larger. The wind carried dust and silence, the kind of silence that made a man's thoughts too loud. He knew the look of city men, how they sat too high on their horses, how their boots never seemed to collect dust, and this one rode just like them, except lighter, like the horse was more friend than transport. When the rider dismounted, the first thing Clay noticed wasn't her fine clothes or polished boots, but the way her eyes met his steady, uncertain, like someone who'd rehearsed this meeting a dozen times and still wasn't ready. "Mr. Harlow?" she asked, her voice smooth, practiced, but with a tremor that didn't belong to any salesman. He didn't answer right away. She removed her hat, and a tumble of chestnut hair caught the sunlight like fire against the red dirt. "I'm Clara," she said, swallowing. Clara Beaumont. The name dropped heavy between them, and Clay's jaw tightened, the memory of her father's name tasting like rust and regret. He turned his gaze toward the distant ridge where the land rolled out in wounded beauty, parched, cracked, but still alive. "You're standin' on private land," he said finally, his voice low as gravel. "I reckon you know that." Clara nodded, trying to keep her poise. "My father sent me. He said maybe you'd listen to reason." Clay's laugh was dry and without humor. "Reason," he repeated, testing the word like it might break in his mouth. "That what they're callin' money now?" She flinched, but steadied herself, determined not to show weakness. "You can't keep holding on to this place," she said softly. "It's dying, Mr. Harlow. The soil, the wells, they're finished. My father can make something out of it again." Clay's eyes narrowed. "Your father don't know what life is out here. He only knows how to own it." A gust of wind swept between them, carrying dust across her boots and through the open gate. She looked around the sagging barn, the corral where two tired horses shifted their weight, the ghost of prosperity buried beneath years of drought. Yet there was a quiet beauty to it all, something sacred in its decay. "You love it here," she said, not as a question, but a revelation. Clay didn't reply. His silence was a wall built from years of loss and sweat, a kind of faith she couldn't yet understand. Clara took a breath, lowering her voice. "He told me you were stubborn. I didn't think you'd be cruel." That made him look at her, really look. "Cruel?" he repeated. "Cruel is letting strangers tell me what my life's worth." For a moment, they just stood there, two worlds staring each other down across the same patch of dying earth. The wind shifted again, gentler this time, stirring her hair and the scent of sagebrush. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, and the sound hung in the still air like a warning. Clay finally turned away, heading for the corral, his boots heavy against the dirt. "Storm's comin'," he muttered. "You best ride back before it hits." But Clara didn't move. She looked out over the land, his land, and something in her chest pulled tight, a feeling she couldn't name. She wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Not until she understood why this man would rather die with the land than sell it. The horizon darkened to a bruise as the wind began to howl, carrying red dust that clawed at the sky and swallowed the sun whole. Clara stood by her horse, hesitating, watching the storm rise like an angry god over the Silver Mesa. Clay Harlow was already at the barn, securing the doors, his movements sharp, efficient, unwilling to look her way. "Ain't wise to ride in that," he said finally, his voice nearly lost to the wind. "Storm'll strip you to bone before you make the ridge." Clara hesitated, pride warring with practicality, then gave a small nod. "Then I'll stay just until it passes." Clay didn't reply, just turned toward the house, the set of his shoulders saying he wasn't happy about it. Inside, the air was heavy with old wood, kerosene, and something else, memory. The ranch house felt like a museum of a life paused mid-breath. A rocking chair that hadn't rocked in years. A quilt folded so neatly it could have been armor. Clay lit a lamp, its glow revealing the age in his face and the lines carved deep by loneliness. Clara brushed the dust from her sleeves, trying to find comfort in the silence. But the quiet here wasn't peaceful, it was watchful. "You've lived here your whole life?" she asked, voice gentle, unsure. Clay grunted, sitting at the table, pouring black coffee into a tin mug. "Ain't much worth talking about," he said. His words hit a wall inside her he didn't want to share. Not his story, not his space. Yet something in her refused to stop trying. "My father says this place used to be beautiful," she ventured, looking toward the window where lightning flickered over the fields. Green grass, wild horses, rivers that didn't dry up. Clay's jaw twitched. "Your father wouldn't know beauty if it bit him." Clara flinched at the venom in his tone, but before she could answer, a crack of thunder rolled so close it shook the walls. The lamps flickered, and the storm's roar filled the house. She wandered to the mantel, drawn to a collection of framed photos dulled by dust. There were landscapes, a young Clay beside a horse, and then one that made her breath hitch, a woman, soft-eyed and beautiful, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. The edges of the photograph had curled with time, but the faces were clear enough to recognize. Clara's voice faltered. "Who is she?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Clay didn't look up. "That," he said, voice low, "was the only thing this place ever gave me worth keepin'." The words trembled with something raw. Clara stared at the photo, her pulse quickening. Her mother, she'd seen the same picture once, hidden in a drawer her father told her not to open. But here it was, older, more loved, and the baby in her arms. She ran her fingers along the tiny face. "That's me," she whispered. Clay's head lifted, eyes meeting hers across the room, and in that charged silence, the truth settled like dust after a storm. "Your mama left with Beaumont when you were still in diapers," he said quietly. "Didn't think I'd ever see either of you again." The room felt too small, the air too thick to breathe. Clara turned away, fighting the sting in her eyes. Outside, wind rattled the shutters, a steady, rising wail like grief made sound. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm raged against the walls, but inside, another storm had already begun, one that had waited 20 years to break. The night stretched long and mean as the storm clawed at the walls, filling every crevice of the ranch house with the wild breath of the desert. Clay sat hunched at the table, the lantern light carving hollows into his face, while Clara stood by the window, watching the lightning dance across the horizon like angry ghosts. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence between them was thicker than the air outside, too full of things unsaid, too heavy to break easily. Finally, Clay cleared his throat, the sound rough, reluctant. "She liked storms," he said quietly, eyes unfocused, as if watching a memory instead of the present. Clara turned, startled by the tenderness in his tone. "My mother?" she asked, her voice almost lost to the wind. He nodded slowly. "She'd stand right there where you are now," said. The thunder made her feel small enough to believe in God again. His words carried a kind of reverence, and for a moment, the years fell away from his face. Clara swallowed, unsure what to do with the ache in her chest. "She never talked about you," she said softly, half apology, half confession. Clay's mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "I expect she didn't. Beaumont wouldn't have liked that." He poured another cup of coffee, the scrape of tin on wood loud in the small room. "Your father, he came out here once. Fancy suit, shiny boots, said he was investin' in the future. What he meant was taking whatever wasn't nailed down. That included her." Clara stiffened. "She loved him," she said, maybe too quickly. Clay looked at her then, eyes sharp, the flicker of the lamp reflected in them like fire. "She loved what she thought he was," he said. "The man had charm. I'll give him that. But charm don't build fences, and it sure as hell don't keep promises." The words landed like blows, and Clara felt herself bristle. "You think money's a sin," she said, crossing her arms. "My father worked for everything. He has. You call it stealing because you couldn't keep up. Clay's chair scraped back against the floor as he stood, the old wood groaning in protest. You don't know nothing about what your daddy took from me, he said, voice shaking not from anger, but from something deeper hurt, long buried. He didn't just buy her, Clara. He bought my future. Every acre I was going to raise our life on. Outside, thunder cracked so loud the window panes rattled, as if the sky itself were answering his rage. Clara turned away, blinking back tears. She didn't want to believe him, didn't want to see her father through this man's eyes. You think you're the only one who lost something? She said, her voice trembling. You think she didn't suffer, leaving this place? She died never talking about it, maybe because it hurt too much. Clay's breath came hard, his shoulders rising and falling like the tide of his temper. For a heartbeat, he seemed ready to shout, to let 20 years of bitterness spill out into the storm. But then he stopped, his voice falling to a rough whisper. She was the only thing I ever prayed for, he said. And she took my prayer with her. Clara turned back toward him, her heart breaking for both of them, for the years between what was and what could never be again. Outside, the rain came harder, slashing the windows like a punishment. The lantern flickered once, twice, before steadying again, its light soft and mournful. And in that small, weathered room, two people bound by blood and betrayal sat in the glow of what was left, neither enemies nor family yet, but two lost souls haunted by the same ghost. The morning sun rose weak and red over the silver mesa, its light filtering through a haze of dust that hung heavy after the storm. The silence that followed felt almost wrong, like the world was holding its breath after too much shouting. Clay was already outside when Clara stepped from the house, hat low, sleeves rolled, his movements deliberate and slow as he cinched the saddle strap on his old bay mare. You comin'? He asked without looking at her, his tone neither invitation nor order, just fact. Clara hesitated, still stung from the words thrown between them last night, but something in her wouldn't let her turn away. She followed him to the corral, her city boots caked with mud, her hands uncertain as she mounted a borrowed horse. Together, they rode out toward the edge of the ranch, where the land unfurled in shades of rust and gold, stretching as far as the eye could see. The silence between them rode along, too, thick as the dust curling up beneath the horse's hooves. When they reached the dry creek bed, Clara slowed, eyes tracing the cracked soil, the skeletal remains of mesquite clinging to life. Doesn't it bother you? She asked quietly. Watching it die? Clay's jaw tightened as he looked out over the barren earth. Ain't dead, he said. Just sleepin'. Land don't die easy, it just waits for folks to quit giving up on it. He dismounted and knelt near a patch of dry brush, pressing his calloused hand into the dirt like a priest saying prayer. You feel that? He said without looking up. Still breathin'. You just gotta listen. Clara didn't answer, but she watched him, the reverence in his gesture, the quiet devotion of a man whose faith had long since outlasted proof. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint scent of sage and sunburnt earth. She could almost believe him, almost. But then she remembered why she was there, the words her father had told her before she left. She swallowed, heart thudding. My father, he has plans, she began carefully. Big ones. He wants to turn this place into something new. A resort, with cabins, stables, maybe a golf course. He says it could bring life back here. Clay stood, his face hardening. Life? He repeated, voice low and dangerous. You call that life? Asphalt and tourists and city folk riding horses for pictures? He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. He wants to carve up the mesa, pour concrete over graves, tear down what's left of men who built this place with their hands. Clara tried to hold his gaze, but his anger was a living thing. You can't stop change, she said softly. You can't fight the world forever. His eyes flashed like flint. Ain't fighting the world, girl. Just fighting the kind of men who think they own it. His words hit her deep, too deep, and she turned her face away so he wouldn't see the tears forming. You're blind, he went on, voice rough. Same as your daddy. Think money's the answer to everything. But some things... His hand swept toward the horizon, trembling slightly. Some things ain't for sellin'. The wind rose again, sharp and dry, swirling dust around them until it stung her eyes. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. Instead, she tugged the reins sharply and turned her horse away. "Maybe you're the one who's blind," she whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear, and then she was gone, galloping through the open plain, her tears mixing with the grit on her face. Behind her, Clay stood motionless, watching her fade into the horizon, his figure dark against the rising Sunday. The land around him was quiet again, but not at peace. It pulsed with the same old ache that had haunted him for 20 years, the wound that would never close. The night sky over Silver Mesa burned red before the fire ever reached them. Clay smelled it first, a bitter sting of smoke carried on the wind like a warning from hell itself. He didn't hesitate. The land was his blood, and when it bled, so did he. He saddled his mare, coughing against the thickening air, and rode hard toward the ridge where the first flames licked at the horizon. Behind him, the ranch stood dark and silent, unaware that its fate was already being written in firelight. The wind whipped hotter, harsher, scattering embers like stars gone mad. By the time he reached the dry creek bed, the fire was alive, a roaring beast swallowing the brush, climbing the slope with a hunger no man could reason with. Clay jumped from the saddle, grabbed the shovel from his saddlebag, and began hacking at the dirt, creating a line, a prayer, a desperate stand against something bigger than him. Sweat poured down his neck, and the heat seared his lungs, but he kept going, cursing the flames, cursing the sky, and cursing himself for growing old. He didn't hear the horse until it was nearly upon him. "Clay!" Clara's voice cut through the chaos, raw and desperate. She rode through the smoke, face streaked with ash, hair tangled by the wind. "You can't fight this alone." He spun, anger flashing, but before he could bark a word, she was already off her horse, grabbing a shovel from the pack. "Told you to go home," he shouted over the roar. "Told you I'm not your problem." She swung the shovel into the dirt beside him, eyes blazing. "Maybe you should have told me that before you made me care." For a moment, even the fire seemed to hesitate between them. Then the wind shifted, and the flames lunged closer, forcing them both into motion. Side by side, they fought like two halves of the same stubborn soul, swinging, digging, beating the fire back inch by inch. The night became a blur of heat and noise, a war without mercy. At one point, a gust threw sparks across Clay's arm, setting his sleeve ablaze. Clara dropped her shovel and threw herself at him, slapping the fire out with her bare hands. He caught her wrist, his eyes wide and wild. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "You'll get yourself killed." She met his gaze through tears and smoke. "Then I'll die where you stand." His breath hitched, and for the first time in 20 years, Clay's voice broke. "I knew about you," he said, the confession torn from somewhere deep. "Knew you were mine. Every letter she sent, every word she wouldn't say, I knew. But what right did I have to come after you? You were safe, and I was... this." He gestured to the burning land, the ruin of all he'd held on to. Clara's face crumpled, her tears cutting clean lines through the ash. "You could have come anyway," she whispered. "I would have known." He had no answer, only exhaustion and the hollow sound of fire dying in the distance. By dawn, the blaze had burned itself to embers, the ground charred and steaming, the air thick with silence. Clay sank to his knees, coughing, chest heaving. Clara knelt beside him, her hand trembling as she touched his shoulder. "It's over," she said, voice soft as the morning wind. He shook his head weakly. "No," he murmured. "Not yet." The sun rose slow and pale behind them, casting light on a land scorched but still standing much like its keeper. The Silver Mesa had survived the fire, but in Clay's eyes, Clara saw the truth. Part of him hadn't. The morning after the fire dawned gray and hollow, the air thick with the ghost of smoke and something heavier finality. Clara worked quietly in the dim light of Clay's kitchen, her hands trembling as she wrung out a rag dipped in cool water. Clay sat slumped in the chair by the window, shirt torn, arm wrapped in a rough bandage that already showed through with blood. He wouldn't meet her eyes, wouldn't speak, just stared out at the land he'd nearly burned himself saving. The silence between them was thick as ash, and Clara felt its weight settle deep in her chest. "You should be in bed," she said gently. He grunted, shaking his head. "Beds are for men who quit." His voice was weak but laced with the same stubbornness that had carried him through fire and grief alike. She sighed, moving to the small dresser in the corner for fresh bandages, when she noticed a tin box tucked beneath it, old, dented, half buried under dust. Curiosity flickered before guilt could stop her. She pulled it out, brushing off the grime. Inside were folded letters, brittle and yellow, the ink faded but still legible. The top one was addressed in a neat, looping hand. Margaret, her mother's name. Beneath it, another smaller, shakier was marked simply, "For Clara, when she's old enough to understand." Clara froze, the breath catching in her throat. Her heart beat so loud she was sure he could hear it. "What's that you got?" Clay asked without turning. She didn't answer. Instead, she sank into the chair opposite him, unfolding the first letter. The paper crackled softly. "Dear Margaret," she began, her voice trembling. "I hope the city gives you what I couldn't. I ain't angry no more. Just tired. I keep fixing things on this ranch like you'll come back to see them. Maybe that's foolish. Maybe that's all I know how to do." Her voice faltered as the words blurred through tears. Clay turned slowly. His eyes clouded, but focused on her face, as if seeing both her and the woman who wrote her life into his ruin. Clara swallowed hard and opened another. "For Clara," she read, softer now. "You don't know me, but you're the reason I still wake up before dawn. Every sunrise I wonder if you're out there somewhere looking at the same sky. Your mama said the city's better for you, but I reckon love don't need fences or money. If someday you come back to this place, I hope you see it not as a burden but as proof you were loved by a man too stubborn to let go." When she finished, the silence that followed was alive with ghosts. Clay rubbed a shaking hand over his face, the years breaking through in the cracks of his voice. "Your mama made her choice," he said finally, each word slow, careful. "But I never stopped hoping you'd find your way home. That was all it took." The wall inside Clara broke, the one she'd built from city pride and borrowed loyalties. Tears spilled freely, and she pressed the letters to her chest like they could hold her together. For the first time, she saw her life not as the perfect picture her father painted, but as something built on another man's heartbreak. Clay's eyes glistened, but he looked away, swallowing hard. The sound of hooves outside cut through the moment. One of the ranch hands burst through the door, hat in hand, face pale. "Mr. Harlow," he said breathlessly. "They're comin' Beaumont's men. They're riding in from the south road." Clay didn't move right away. Then he straightened, wincing, his voice gravel but steady. "Let 'em come," he said, the words carrying like a promise. Outside, the wind stirred the ashes. And for the first time, Clara understood they weren't remnants of destruction, but what was left after something refused to die. The day Beaumont arrived, the sky over Silver Mesa was the color of steel, and the air carried that strange, electric stillness that comes before a storm that doesn't yet know what it wants to be. Clay stood at the porch rail, his arm bound, face drawn but unbowed, as the line of black automobiles came crawling up the dirt road like a procession of locusts. Clara stood beside him, her heart pounding hard enough to shake her ribs. When the doors opened, her father stepped out first, immaculate as ever, his suit sharp, his boots polished to mirrors. Two lawyers followed, briefcases in hand, their city shoes sinking into red dust that didn't belong to them. Beaumont took in the house, the burned ridge beyond, and finally Clay, with that same look of appraisal he'd give a piece of land or a horse he meant to buy. "Mr. Harlow," he said, tipping his hat with the faintest edge of mockery. "I'd say it's been a long time, but you don't look like much has changed." Clay didn't bother to move. Some of us ain't got the time for polish. The air between them was thick with something more dangerous than heat. Clara felt it. Felt both men's pride coiled tight as wire. Beaumont's gaze flicked to her, softer but not kind. "You look tired, darling," he said. "This place can't be good for you." She met his eyes squarely. "I'm fine," she said, and for the first time in her life, she meant it. Beaumont's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Then let's finish this nonsense." He gestured for one of the lawyers to open the case, pulling out a crisp stack of papers that gleamed white against the dust. "The offer still stands more than generous, considering the shape of this land. You'll sign it, Mr. Harlow." and you'll walk away with enough to rest easy the rest of your days." Clay let out a low, humorless laugh. "Rest easy?" he said. "You ever rest easy after stealing what don't belong to you?" Beaumont's eyes narrowed. "I didn't steal anything. I made an offer, and your pride's the only thing costing you peace." Clara stepped forward then, her voice sharp. "Stop it, both of you." She looked at her father. "Why this land, of all places? What's so important about it?" Beaumont sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose, like explaining to a child. "You want the truth? There's oil under this mesa. Enough to make this whole county worth something again. That's why I wanted it. Not for sentiment, not for nostalgia, because it's valuable." The word struck her harder than she expected, a punch to the chest that left her hollow. "So that's it," she said quietly. "All this time, it was never about building something new. It was about taking something else." Clay spat into the dirt, his disgust sharp as the smell of oil he hated. "Profit," he said, the word twisted in his mouth. "That's all it ever was with you." Beaumont turned on him, his control cracking. "Don't preach to me about principles, Harlow. You could have had all this a life, a future, but you chose dirt over destiny." Clay stepped forward, his voice low and final. "You took everything I had, Beaumont. You won't take the ground I'm buried on." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Beaumont nodded to his lawyer, who handed over the contract. "Last chance," he said. "Sign it, or I'll take it in court. You'll lose everything." Clay took the papers, looked them over with the faintest smirk, then tore them straight down the middle. The sound like thunder against the quiet. "Then I'll lose it my way," he said. Beaumont's face hardened, the mask of civility finally gone. Clara felt the wind rise between them, dry and cold, carrying with it the scent of something ending. The lawyers packed their papers in silence, and the black cars rolled away, leaving dust and silence in their wake. Clay turned toward the land, shoulders heavy, but his eyes fierce with something unbroken. Behind him, Clara stood trembling, caught between two men and the truth that neither one would ever truly win. The days that followed Beaumont's departure stretched long and heavy, the kind of days that bled into each other until time itself seemed to slow. The confrontation had left its mark on the land, on the house, and most of all on Clay Harlow. The fire, the fight, and the years of stubbornness had carved deep lines into him, and though he tried to hide it, Clara could see the change. He moved slower now, coughed harder, and sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, he'd press a hand to his chest and wait for the pain to pass. But he never complained. That wasn't in him. Clara stayed, though she told herself at first it was just until he was stronger. But the truth was, the mesa had already begun to pull at her the way the horizon breathed at dusk, the rhythm of hooves at dawn, the quiet work that spoke louder than any words. She learned to mend fences, to feed the horses, to fix what could be fixed and let go of what couldn't. And in those silent hours between sunrise and memory, she began to understand what this land meant. It wasn't just dirt, it was endurance. A promise that life, no matter how worn or battered, kept going. Clay watched her from the porch sometimes, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. "You're learnin'," he'd mutter, and she'd just nod, pretending not to care how much those two words meant. The ranch hands noticed too. They started calling her Miss Harlow, half in jest, half in respect. It startled her the first time, but she didn't correct them. At night, when the wind whispered through the open windows, she'd sit by Clay's bedside, reading aloud from the old letters he'd written but never sent. Sometimes he'd listen, eyes closed, breathing shallow but steady. Sometimes he'd drift into dreams that looked too much like goodbyes. One evening, as the sky burned violet and gold, he asked her quietly, "When I'm gone, you gonna keep it?" The question hung between them, soft, heavy. Clara froze, hands twisting in her lap. "I don't know," she said after a long moment. "It's so much, too much. The work, the debt." He nodded, like he'd expected that. "Ain't no shame in leavin'," he said, voice rough. "Just don't sell it to a man who sees oil where you see a home." The sun slipped below the ridge, and shadows filled the room like water. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence said what her heart couldn't. He turned his gaze back to the window, the light catching his profile, strong even in weakness. "You got your mama's fire," he murmured. "Don't let it burn you the way it did her." She sat with him until he fell asleep, the sound of his breathing steady but fragile. Later that night, Clara sat at the old wooden desk in the corner of his room. The moonlight spilled across the paper as she dipped the pen and began to write. Her words came slow at first, then faster, as if something long dammed up inside her was finally finding its way out. "You taught me to win," she wrote, tears blurring the ink, "but he taught me to live." She paused, letting the meaning settle, feeling its truth settle into her bones. When she finished, she folded the letter neatly and sealed it with trembling hands. It wasn't meant to wound, only to end the fight between the life she was born into and the one she'd found here among dust, wind, and silence. Outside, the coyotes cried to the moon, and for the first time, Clara felt that the sound didn't belong to loneliness, it belonged to belonging itself. The dawn came slow that morning, soft and gray, brushing the edges of the silver mesa in a pale light that felt more like memory than morning. Clay Harlow was already awake, though his body protested every movement, every breath that caught sharp in his chest. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long while, staring at the window where the first blush of sunrise touched the glass. His hat hung on the peg beside it, old and sweat-stained, the same one that had shaded him through droughts, dust storms, and heartbreak. He reached for it with a trembling hand, feeling the weight of it settle like an old friend atop his head. He dressed slowly, boots creaking, joints stiff, the house still and sleeping around him. For once, Clara didn't stir. Maybe she knew, maybe some part of her heart already felt the shift in the wind that told of endings. Clay stepped out onto the porch, the boards groaning under his weight, and breathed in the cold air. It carried the scent of sage, smoke, and something else, something pure. He saddled his horse with the care of ritual, the leather worn smooth by years of the same hands, the same motion. The mare flicked her ears, as if sensing the change in him. But she stood still as he swung into the saddle. He rode out slow, the world around him still half in shadow, the horizon beginning to glow. The wind tugged at his coat, whispering secrets through the grass that shimmered gold with dew. The pain in his chest flared with every breath, but he didn't stop. He followed the familiar trail up to the ridge, the same place where he'd once stood with her mother, and where he'd later watched the fire's edge crawl across the land like a living scar. Now, the mesa stretched below him, vast and endless, painted in the light of a sun he knew he might not see set again. He dismounted with effort, sinking to one knee as he caught his breath. His hands trembled as he touched the ground, the earth cool beneath his fingers. "Still here," he whispered to it, "still breathin'." He didn't hear Clara's voice at first, faint and desperate in the wind, calling his name. She'd woken to the emptiness of the house, to the note he hadn't left, and she'd ridden out with fear pounding in her chest. When she reached the ridge, her heart stopped. He was there, still as the stones around him, hat low, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Clay," she breathed, sliding from her horse, rushing to his side. He looked at her, a faint smile cutting through the lines of pain. "You made good time," he murmured, voice rough but gentle. She knelt beside him, tears already blurring her vision. "You shouldn't be out here," she said, grasping his arm, feeling the tremor beneath his skin. He shook his head slowly. Had to see it one more time, the light, the mesa. His gaze drifted to the horizon, to the golden sprawl of land that had cost him everything but had given him something greater in return purpose. "Look," he whispered. "Really look." She followed his eyes, seeing it the way he did for the first time, not as dying land, but as a living testament. "It ain't about ownin'," he said, voice fading now, barely a breath. "It's about belongin'." His eyes fluttered shut, his hand falling still in hers. The wind rose, tugging at his hat, sending it tumbling down the ridge until it disappeared into the tall grass below. Clara clutched his hand to her chest, the sound of her sobs breaking against the vast quiet. Around them, the world seemed to pause, the sun climbed higher, the land gleamed gold, and the silence that followed was not empty, but sacred. She wept until the wind dried her tears, and when she finally looked up, the mesa seemed different. The same wind that took his hat carried his spirit across it, through it, into her, and in that moment, she understood he had never really left. The weeks after Clay's passing settled over Silver Mesa like the long sigh of the desert after rain, quiet, heavy, but alive in a way only grief can make something live. The world moved slower without his footsteps, without the gravel in his voice or the sound of him moving through the house at dawn. Yet somehow, his presence lingered everywhere. In the steady creak of the porch boards, in the smell of saddle oil and sagebrush, in the wind that whistled low through the fence posts. Clara found herself keeping his routines without meaning to, up before the sun, checking the troughs, mending what broke. She'd never learned the work from books or instruction, only from watching, from loving him too late, but deeply enough to understand that the ranch wasn't something to be owned, it was something to belong to. When the lawyers came, the same men with polished shoes and papers crisp as lies, she met them at the gate. They spoke Beaumont's name with practiced courtesy, said her father wanted to handle things amicably, as if death were just another clause to sign away. She listened, quiet, while they spoke of oil, opportunity, and obligation. And when they were done, she said the words she knew Clay would have wanted to hear. "Silver Mesa ain't for sale," she told them. "Not now. Not ever." The look on their faces' disbelief turned to frustration almost made her smile. She handed them back their papers, the wind catching the edge of the top sheet and tearing it free, sending it tumbling across the field like a bird that forgot it was caged. They left soon after, their engines coughing dust into the distance, and when the sound faded, the silence that followed felt like freedom. That evening, Clara rode out to the ridge where Clay had taken his last breath. The land stretched wide before her, the colors shifting in the falling light gold to rose to deep, eternal amber. She'd been thinking for days about what to do, how to honor the promise she'd never made aloud. The answer had come to her in the whisper of hooves at twilight, when she'd seen a small herd of wild mustangs drifting down from the North Hills, drawn by the scent of rain and open space. They were what Clay had called the Mesa's heartbeat, untamed, proud, and meant to run free. That night, she opened the north gate. The old one Clay had sealed years ago to keep the world out. She opened it wide and let the horses come. In the days that followed, she began turning the ranch into a sanctuary, a place where the land and its wild things could exist without chains. She used her inheritance not from greed, but gratitude to repair what needed fixing, and to let everything else stay wild. The first time she rode among the mustangs, her hair unbound, the wind tearing through it, she felt the world fall into rhythm beneath her, the same rhythm Clay must have felt, the same pulse that tied him to this place until his last breath. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in a fire that didn't burn but healed. As the wind carried through the grass, she spoke softly, though her words seemed to echo across the mesa, bound to its bones. "He thought I came to take his land," she said, voice trembling with the weight of love and loss. "But he gave me something no money could buy, a name, a place, and a reason to stay." Her eyes lifted to the sky, where the light turned from gold to deep violet, and for the first time, the quiet didn't hurt. The Silver Mesa breathed beneath her, whole again, not because it had been saved, but because it had been seen. And as the last of the daylight kissed the horizon, Clara Harlow, daughter of two worlds, heir to both love and legacy, rode on, her shadow stretching long and sure across the land her father had loved, her spirit unchained, the promise of Silver Mesa kept at last.